Speaker, I've heard some of the national speakers pretend that this budget is a Labor-light budget. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing Labor-light about this budget. This is a conjurer's budget. You know, Mark Mitchell was right. It's quite a good thing that under 13-year-olds can go to the doctor without charges. What he didn't tell us is while the great conjurer was saying, look here, under 13-year-olds, free GP visits, at the same time he was ripping out the guts of the health system by cutting health spending in real terms by 2 to 3%. That's what Treasury says. That's what Bill English was challenged on and question and answer on Sunday, and he had no answers. It's fine that we get our kiddies to the doctor. It's not fine that we rip the guts out of health spending by increasing spending at less than the rate of the increase in population and the increase in inflation. And the same thing, Mr. Speaker, happening in education. A good budget is a budget that helps the wealth of the country through the people of the country. It's people-centred. This budget cuts real spending on health, cuts real spending on education, and reduces the police budget in real terms by $40 million, according to the Police Association. So much for the Law and Order Party that wants to have a safer community. A $40 million cut in real terms in the policing budget. Those are all failures. Those are all failures, but the biggest failure in this budget, Mr. Speaker, is that this budget doesn't recognise, doesn't act on, doesn't put in place measures to deal with the housing crisis. And there is John Key that says, what housing crisis? Well, there's an example of a government that has become arrogant and out of touch. From the lofty heights of St. Stephen's Avenue, the Lord looks down over his empire and says, what crisis, what peasants, what is the problem with housing? I'll tell Mr. Key what the problem with housing is. The problem with housing is that this year we will have the lowest rate of home ownership in New Zealand in half a century. Half a century, Mr. Chairman. I grew up, and you grew up, in a New Zealand where the Kiwi dream of owning your own home was something that we assumed we could aspire to. My parents were a working class family. They bought their own home. They capitalised on my family benefit to do so, and good luck to them. I had my own home in my early 20s. I paid $12,500 for a very nice cottage in Papatoetoe. And my children go out into the market today, and to buy a house in my working class electorate of Mount Roskill, what is it, Mr. Mitchell? $700,000. $700,000. And the increase in house prices since 2008 has been 40%. You know what? 40% increase in house prices since 2008. And I ask any member on those benches to tell the young Kiwi couple desperate to own their own home, how can they do it? 46% of them had no wage rise in the last year, Mr. Speaker. 46. Nearly half of all New Zealanders got no wage rise. Every one of those New Zealanders had their rent go up, and they sat in my electorate and they watched the price of houses last month alone, the month of April, go up by $6,000. Can you imagine the despair of the young couple who are desperate to get a home of their own when they face that? No wonder the OECD has just produced a report in utter contradiction to what the Prime Minister says, saying that we are the country with the most expensive houses in the world and the least affordable houses. And you know what this Prime Minister does after 6 years in office? He says it's the Labor government's fault. 6 years in office, Mr. Key. 6 years. We're sick of the excuses. We want to see some action. But we're not seeing action. We're seeing only excuses. Well, Mr. Speaker, when we look at this budget, what does the Treasury say? The Treasury says about housing that at the moment, to buy an average priced home in New Zealand with an 80% mortgage, you will be paying 43% of the average full-time wage. 43%. Sounds quite high, Mr Speaker, doesn't it? But you know what it says? It says in 5 years' time that figure will be 63%, and for Jamie Lee Ross's information, in Auckland it will be 86% of the average full-time wage. And you know, fine if you're a born-to-rule person that has money, that can help from your parents. Every parent wants to help their kid get into their home. But what about all those families out there that can't rely on that home? How do they ever aspire to home ownership? I was knocking on doors down on the street that I was brought up in Mount Roskill the other day. It's called Warren Avenue. And I went down a long driveway, and there was the old houses there, and there were infill houses behind them. And I knocked on every door, and you know what I found, Mr Speaker? I found that every single family living in both the old homes and the new homes were tenants. They were renting their property. And when I talked to them, they felt that they were doomed to becoming tenants in their own land because there was no hope at all of home ownership. And this government did what in the budget to help those families? Let's hear it from it. Nothing. Well, actually, they did do something. The price of nails from China and the price of jibboard from Thailand will apparently come down because now those countries can dump those products in the market at a cost less than it costs to produce them. That's what they did. And is that going to be worth anything? No, most first-home buyers are buying existing homes. And the government says $3,500 in cost savings. Where did they pluck that figure from, Mr Young? Where did they pluck that figure from? I'll tell you this. There is no sound foundation for believing that that will be the saving. There is no proper estimate of that. There is no guarantee that 1 cent of that will be handed on from the builder to the consumer, and it will do nothing to help those families desperate to buy their own homes. $3,500, if they were right about that figure, if every dollar was passed on to the consumer, that would be less than half the cost that houses went up by in the month of April alone. Mr Speaker, this government is a shocker. It has done nothing to help people realise that fundamental human desire to be homeowners. And I want to talk in the time that I've got left about the answers that Labor has, Mr Speaker, because I think that the Labor policy is offering hope. The first thing that you need to do is to recognise, as anyone can recognise when they go along to a housing auction, is that the price of houses in New Zealand are being driven up by speculators and property investors. And the answer to that, Mr Speaker, is a capital gains tax on property investment. And I've heard person after person, and Jackie Dean's about to mouth it again, say it won't work. Well, I say to Jackie Dean, look at what the chief economist from Westpac, Dominic Stevens, said this morning in the Herald. What did he say? He said that a 15% capital gains tax will reduce the value of speculation by 23%. He said we should do it. The chief economist of the ANZ said we should do it. The governor of the Reserve Bank says that we should do it. The chief executive officer of the Treasury said that we should do it. Take the speculation out of the housing market. Why won't National do it? Because there's vested interests in every one of them there. How many? Look at the pecuniary interest table, and you'll see why the National MPs don't want to stop speculation, don't want to make housing easier for the first home owning family. They want to make life better for themselves, and that's despicable, Mr Speaker. And then there's an element of that speculation that is foreign speculation. Nick Smith says 22,000. Disingenuous. 22,000 owners, each with probably 10 houses each. But Inland Revenue said it's 11% of the ownership is owned by foreign investors. And I want to ask the next National Speaker to explain to this House and to young New Zealanders what good it does to New Zealand to have foreign speculators pushing up the price of our residential housing. Where's the benefit to New Zealand? There is no benefit to New Zealand. There's only downside. And I want to come to Michael Woodhouse's point. I happen to be pro-immigration, but I believe that immigration has to be managed in a way that it does not soar and put unnecessary costs on the housing market. That's why it needs to be controlled.
I call David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a good budget. It's a great budget for New